At my son's graduation party, my daughter-in-law stood up in front of 60 guests and told everyone that she and my son would be taking over my house. Not inheriting it someday. Taking it. That weekend, I want you to stay with me until the end of this, because what happened next, the phone call I made from my driveway that night, changed everything, and I need you to understand how we got there. My name is Gordon. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a high school history teacher in Davenport, Iowa. I coached JV baseball on the side for 15 of those years. I drove a used Ford F-150 until the wheels practically fell off. I am not a dramatic man. I don't make scenes. I don't raise my voice in public. My late wife Beverly used to say I was so even-keeled I could sleep through a thunderstorm. And honestly, she wasn't wrong. Beverly passed 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I still can't talk about those 11 weeks without my throat closing up, so I won't. What I will say is that after she was gone, the house, our house, the one we bought together in 1987 for $94,000 and paid off in full by 2011, became the one thing that still felt like her. The garden she planted along the back fence, the yellow curtains in the kitchen she picked out the summer before she got sick, the way the light comes through the living room windows at 4 in the afternoon and turns everything gold. That house is Beverly to me. It always will be. My son Cody is 34. He works in sales for a logistics company. He's smart, driven, good at his job. I was proud of him when he got his degree, proud of him when he got his first promotion, proud of him even when he got his first promotion, proud of him even when he called less and less often after he married Tiffany. I need to be careful about how I talk about her because I spent a long time telling myself I was imagining things. I met her at Cody's company Christmas party about 6 years ago. She was charming that night, attentive. She asked me questions about Beverly, about teaching, about the house. I thought she was genuinely interested. Looking back, I think she was taking inventory. They got married 2 years later in a venue outside Chicago. Beautiful wedding. I paid for a significant portion of it because Cody asked me to and because Beverly would have wanted me to help. I didn't complain. That's not who I am. The first hint that something was off came about a year into the marriage. Cody called me one Sunday, which was already unusual because calls from him had become rare, and said that Tiffany thought it might be a good idea if I looked into senior living options. I was 59 years old. I was walking 3 miles a day. I was in better shape than most men my age. I told Cody that, and he laughed a little nervously and said he knew. It was just something Tiffany mentioned. Forget it. I tried to forget it. Then the next time I visited them in Chicago, Tiffany made a comment at dinner. Cody had just gotten a big promotion, and we were celebrating, and somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, she said, very casually, the way you'd mentioned the weather, "You know, Gordon, once Cody and I are ready to really settle down, a house like yours in Davenport would be perfect for raising kids, all that yard space." I looked at Cody. He was looking at his plate. I said, "That's Beverly's house, Tiffany," and I kept my voice level the way I always do. She smiled and said, "Of course. I just meant someday." I let it go. I told myself I was being sensitive. This is what I do. I give people the benefit of the doubt because I was raised to believe that most people mean well. Beverly was the same way. Maybe that's why we worked so well together for 32 years. But it kept happening. Small things. Comments about how a house that size was a lot to maintain alone. Questions about whether my property taxes had gone up. They had. And Tiffany seemed very interested in the exact number. Once, when I mentioned I'd had the furnace replaced, she asked, unprompted, whether I'd updated the deed since Beverly passed. I said I had a will and an estate attorney and that everything was in order. She nodded like I'd given the wrong answer. About 8 months before Cody's graduation party, he'd gone back for a master's degree, which I was genuinely thrilled about. I got a call from my neighbor across the street, a retired electrician named Victor who'd been friends with Beverly and me since the 90s. Victor said he'd seen a woman matching Tiffany's description walking slowly around my house one afternoon when I wasn't home, taking photos on her phone. I thanked Victor and hung up and sat in my kitchen for a long time. I want to be honest with you about how I felt. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was something worse than angry. I was sad. I was sad that my son's wife was circling my home like it was a property listing. I was sad that Cody either didn't know or didn't want to know. I was sad in that specific way that only loneliness can make you feel, the kind that Beverly's absence had carved out and that nothing had filled. But I'm also a man who spent 31 years teaching young people how to think. And one thing I know is that you don't make decisions when you're in the middle of a feeling. You gather information first. I called my estate attorney, a woman named Patricia who'd helped me update everything after Beverly passed. I told her what I'd noticed and what Victor had told me. Patricia listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Gordon, I think it's time we made sure your documentation is airtight." We spent 2 sessions going over everything. The house, my retirement accounts, my savings, everything was already in reasonable order, but Patricia suggested some additional steps. I took her advice. And then I waited. Cody's graduation party was held at my house, actually, which tells you something about where things stood. Tiffany had pushed for a venue, but Cody wanted home, and for once he held his ground. I cooked a brisket the way Beverly taught me, made her coleslaw recipe, bought a good cake from the German bakery on 5th Street that's been there since 1962. 60 people in my backyard on a Saturday afternoon in June. I was happy that day, genuinely. Watching my son in his cap and gown in the yard where he used to play catch. It almost felt normal. About 2 hours in, people were loose and relaxed, plates on their laps. The good kind of noise that means everyone is having a real conversation. Tiffany stood up. I thought she was going to make a toast to Cody. People quieted down because that seemed like what was happening. She raised her glass and said, "I also want to take a moment to share some exciting news." She smiled at the crowd, that wide, practiced smile, and she said that she and Cody had decided it was time to plant roots and that they'd be moving into this house, our family home. She said they'd be taking over the property that summer so they could start the next chapter of their lives here. She said, taking over the property. In front of 60 people. In Beverly's backyard. The yard went quiet, not the polite quiet of people waiting for the next thing. The uncomfortable quiet of people who aren't sure what they just heard. I saw Victor across the patio, and he met my eyes. Cody was staring straight ahead. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't frowning either. He had the look of a man who had been told this was going to go one way and was watching it go another. I stood up slowly. My knees aren't what they were, but I stood up the way I used to stand up at the front of a classroom when I needed 30 teenagers to pay attention, without raising my voice. I said, "Tiffany, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but this is the first I'm hearing of this plan." She laughed. That small, dismissive laugh she uses when she wants to make you feel like you're being difficult. "Oh, Gordon, we've talked about this." "We haven't," I said. "Simple. No heat in it." She looked at Cody and then back at me and said, still smiling, still performing, "Well, it's really just the natural next step, don't you think? The house is too big for one person." I looked at my son. I want to tell you that Cody stood up and said something. He didn't. He looked at the grass. I excused myself. I said I was going to check on the food. I walked inside, through the kitchen, out the front door, and I stood in my driveway. I could hear people starting to talk again through the backyard fence, that careful murmur of people pretending they didn't witness something. I took out my phone and I called Patricia. She answered on the second ring. I said, "It happened." She said, "What do you need?" I told her what Tiffany had announced. Patricia was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Gordon, we're ready. Everything we put in place is solid. The house is protected." I stood in my driveway for about 10 minutes after that call. I looked at the front of the house, the porch Beverly and I repainted white the summer. Cody graduated high school, the rose bush she planted the year we moved in, it still blooms every May, and I felt something settle in me. Not anger, not satisfaction, just clarity. I went back inside and finished hosting my son's graduation party. What Tiffany didn't know, what she'd never bothered to ask about or understand, was what Beverly and I had built and why we'd built it the way we had. When Beverly was diagnosed, we had several very hard conversations, practical conversations. Beverly was a practical woman even when she was frightened. One of the things she said to me, I remember we were sitting at the kitchen table late at night with the yellow curtains closed, was, "Gordy, I want you to make sure this house stays yours as long as you need it. Don't let anyone pressure you out of it." She knew me. She knew I would give and give and give until there was nothing left to give. It was one of her concerns about me. After Beverly passed, Patricia helped me set up a life estate. The house on paper would eventually pass to Cody, but only upon my death, and only under specific conditions we'd written into the documentation. Those conditions included a clause that was unusual but that Patricia said she'd recommended to other widowed clients. If there was documented evidence of attempts to coerce or pressure me into vacating or transferring the property early, the inheritance could be redirected entirely to charity, to Beverly's sister in Oregon, to wherever I designated. There was documented evidence. Victor's account of the photos, Tiffany's earlier comments, which I had, on Patricia's advice, quietly noted and dated in writing over the past 8 months, and now 60 witnesses to a public announcement that I'd never agreed to. The week after the graduation party, Patricia sent a formal letter to Cody and Tiffany's attorney. They had retained one, apparently, which told me everything, outlining the terms of the estate documentation and the evidence we had compiled. The letter was polite, precise, and left absolutely no room for negotiation. Cody called me that same night. It was the most real conversation we'd had in years. He wasn't angry. He was quiet in a way I recognized. The way he used to get quiet as a kid when he knew he'd done something he couldn't take back. He asked me if I had really done all that. Set up all that documentation. I said yes. He asked me when. I said, I started after Beverly passed and finalized it 8 months ago. There was a long silence on the line. Then he said, Dad, I want you to know that I didn't know she was going to say that at the party. I believed him. I think that's the honest truth. Tiffany had managed the timing and the public nature of it without Cody's full knowledge, because she knew that once it was said in front of 60 people, momentum would carry it. I said, I believe you, son. He said, I'm sorry. I said, I know. We talked for another hour. About Beverly. About the house. About what he actually remembered about growing up in it. The way she'd put notes in his lunch bag through 8th grade, the Christmas morning he was 11, and she'd stayed up until 2 a.m. assembling the bike he'd asked for. He cried a little. So did I. I'm not embarrassed to say that. Tiffany and Cody did not move into my house that summer. They did not move in the following summer either. What happened instead was a slower, quieter thing. Cody began calling me on Sundays again. Real calls. An hour or more. Sometimes he'd call on a Wednesday just to see how I was doing. About 14 months after the graduation party, Cody called me and said that he and Tiffany were separating. He said it calmly. I didn't ask questions he wasn't ready to answer. I just said, you know, you can always come home. He came for Thanksgiving. First time in 4 years. He slept in his old room. He ate Beverly's stuffing recipe that I'd been making from the index card in her handwriting for 3 years, getting it a little closer each time. We watched football and didn't talk about anything important, and it was exactly what we both needed. He's doing better now, working through things. He still calls on Sundays. The house is the same. The yellow curtains are still in the kitchen. The rose bush bloomed again this May, same as every year. Victor comes over for coffee sometimes on Saturday mornings, and we sit on the porch and talk about baseball and the neighborhood and nothing in particular. I still teach, actually, not full-time, but I do a semester as a substitute when the district calls, because some habits don't leave you. Last spring I had a junior class for 3 weeks, and one of the kids asked me if I'd ever had a moment in my life that changed how I saw everything. I thought about Tiffany standing up in my backyard with her glass raised, and I thought about the call I made from the driveway, and I thought about Cody's voice on the phone that night, quiet and ashamed and finally honest. I told the kid that I had. I told him the moment that changed me wasn't the dramatic one. It wasn't the confrontation or the legal letter or any of the big visible things. The moment that changed me was the one where I decided, months earlier, quietly, in my attorney's office, to take my wife's advice seriously. Beverly had said, make sure this house stays yours. And I had listened. I told that kid what Beverly taught me, that the strongest thing you can do is prepare before you need to. That dignity isn't something someone can take from you in public. It's something you either have or you don't. And it has nothing to do with what anyone announces at a party. He wrote it down. I hope he keeps it. My name is Gordon. I'm 63 years old. My wife loved yellow curtains and rose bushes, and the way afternoon light comes through the windows at 4 o'clock. The house is still mine. And it still feels like her. If you're watching this from somewhere far away, leave your city in the comments. I want to know how far this story has traveled. And if any part of what I shared tonight stayed with you, I'd be grateful if you'd hit that like button. There's more where this came from. I've thought a lot about what I'd called the moment this whole thing turned. People might assume it was the party, Tiffany standing up with her glass, making her announcement, 60 people going quiet in Beverly's backyard. But that wasn't it. That was just the moment the consequences arrived. The real turning point came months earlier, in Patricia's office, when I decided to listen to my wife instead of my own habit of letting things slide. Beverly used to say I was too patient for my own good. She didn't mean it as a compliment, not entirely. There's a version of patience that's wisdom, and there's a version that's just avoidance dressed up in calm clothes. For a long time, I confused the two. I told myself I was being fair to Tiffany, giving her the benefit of the doubt, not jumping to conclusions. But I think the honest truth is that confronting what I saw would have meant confronting something about Cody too, that he was choosing to look away, and I wasn't ready to face that. What I've come to understand is that outcomes don't care about your intentions. Tiffany didn't end up with the house because she was cunning and I was naive. She didn't end up with the house because I had prepared and she hadn't. Those was mechanics. The deeper reason is simpler. She treated a family home like a transaction, and a transaction can be blocked. What can't be blocked is the kind of love Beverly put into that place for 32 years. That's not in any deed. That doesn't transfer. And Cody, I don't think my son is a bad person. I think he spent several years inside a dynamic that made it easier to be quiet than to be honest. I've seen it before. It's not weakness exactly. It's more like a slow erosion, where one small compromise leads to another, until you're standing in your father's backyard staring at the grass while your wife announces something you never fully agreed to. The relief in his voice when he called me that night, the way he cried a little when we talked about his mother. That wasn't a man who had chosen wrong. That was a man who had gotten lost and finally recognized the road. What I keep coming back to, the thing I'd want anyone to take from my story, is this. Preparation is an act of love. When I sat with Patricia and made sure that house was protected, I wasn't being calculating. I was finally doing what Beverly asked me to do. I was taking care of something that mattered. And that act, quiet, undramatic, invisible to everyone at that party, was the one that changed everything. We don't always get to choose the moments that test us, but we almost always get some warning before they arrive. The question is whether we use that warning to get ready, or whether we spend it hoping things will work out on their own. I'm 63 years old. I've made my share of mistakes. I let things go too long, too many times, out of a desire to keep the peace that really just kept the problem. But I listened to Beverly when it counted. And on a June afternoon in my backyard, when Tiffany raised her glass and thought she'd finally won, the thing that protected me wasn't anger or confrontation, or any dramatic last-minute stand. It was a piece of paper I'd signed 8 months earlier, in a quiet office because my wife knew me better than I knew myself. The house still has the yellow curtains. The rose bush bloomed again this May. That's enough for me.